Welcome to the New Life Ministries podcast. Something we don't want to admit is, if we're watching two YouTube videos on the same topic, we will likely pay more attention to the YouTuber that's more conventionally attractive, even if the other one has more knowledge, experience, and sound wisdom. This is exactly what the author of Ecclesiastes is frustratingly having to acknowledge about our world. Let's give it a listen.
Today we are going to look at Ecclesiastes 9 and 10, page 1009. If you have a giant print Bible, which is not showing up on the screen. Well, we have these discussions on it. Oh well, page 1009 if you have a New Living Translation giant print Bible, Ecclesiastes 9 and 10. Have you ever encountered a situation, watched it play out, and been unimpressed by what you saw? You know, there was something that was unjust or not how you think life should go, and then the event plays itself on in your mind for the rest of the evening. Like you just keep cycling back, and you start thinking of other times something similar has happened. That's what our passage is like today. The author has seen something that he's been frustrated by. He actually sees two things he's been frustrated by, and then he riffs on it. So it sounds like a whole bunch of random topics, but they're all him riffing on this thing that he saw. So the Bible Project did an overview of the book of Ecclesiastes, and it got sent to me this week. So we know that Ecclesiastes is lessons from the teacher, and the folks at the Bible Project called him a critic. They said, he is like this sharp, middle-aged critic who's trying to turn your world upside down by telling you things you just don't want to hear. And I thought, I quite like that. Because what he's trying to say is that the world that we learned in the book of Proverbs doesn't work all the time. And this black and white view of the world, if you do this, you always get that, just isn't how life works. So he's making some observations and he's rolling his eyes at some stuff, but there is definitely a critical edge, kind of a cynical side to him. And we know it's easy to be cynical, but his observations are good. And so again, this week he's encountered two situations that involve wisdom and leadership. And he just gets frustrated, and so he riffs and ruminates on them. So we're going to look at Ecclesiastes 9 and 10. Let me just offer a prayer. Father, you speak, we listen. Would you speak through your word? Would you teach us, bring conviction where you want us to see something about ourselves that we haven't pondered before? Perhaps something that is hurting us or that causes frustration, and show us the path to trust you and to understand what this world is like so we respond well. So Lord, in this, bring glory to yourself. Amen. So Ecclesiastes 9, starting with verse 13. Our critic, the teacher, begins. Here is another bit of wisdom that has impressed me as I have watched the way our world works. There was a small town with only a few people, and a great king came with his army and besieged it. A poor, wise man knew how to save the town, and so it was rescued. But afterward, no one thought to thank him. So even though wisdom is better than strength, those who are wise will be despised if they're poor. What they say will not be appreciated for long. So now he begins his riff. Better to hear the quiet words of a wise person than the shouts of a foolish king. Better to have wisdom than weapons of war, but one sinner can destroy much that is good. As dead flies cause even a bottle of perfume to stink, so a little foolishness spoils great wisdom and honor. A wise person chooses the right road. A fool takes the wrong one. You can identify fools just by the way they walk down the street. And if your boss is angry at you, and he's still talking about leadership here, if your boss is angry at you, don't quit. A quiet spirit can overcome even great mistakes. There is another great evil I have seen under the sun. Kings and rulers make a grave mistake when they give great authority to foolish people and low positions to people of proven worth. I have even seen servants riding horseback like princes, and princes walking like servants. When you dig a well, you might fall in. When you demolish an old wall, you could be bitten by a snake. When you work in a quarry, stones might fall on you. When you chop wood, there is danger with each stroke of your axe. Using a dull axe requires great strength, so sharpen the blade. That's the value of wisdom. It helps you succeed. If a snake bites before you charm it, what's the use of being a snake charmer? Wise words bring approval, but fools are destroyed by their own words. Fools base their thoughts on foolish assumptions, and so their conclusions will be wicked madness. They chatter on and on. No one really knows what's going to happen. No one can predict the future. Fools are so exhausted by a little work they can't even find their way home. What sorrow for a land ruled by a servant or child, or the idea is immaturity or someone who's not been trained to lead. What sorrow for the land ruled by a servant, the land whose leaders feast in the morning. Happy is the land whose king is a noble leader and whose leaders feast at the proper time to gain strength for their work, not to get drunk. Laziness leads to a sagging roof. Idleness leads to a leaky house. A party gives laughter. Wine gives happiness, and money gives everything. Never make light of the king, even in your thoughts. And don't make fun of the powerful, even in your own bedroom. For a little bird might deliver your message and tell them what you said. So, he's reflecting on two incidents and kind of letting his mind wander and respond. He tells the story of a small town that's caught in the net of a powerful king, surrounded by the army, about to be overpowered. But in this town, a poor, wise man is there. And because of his wisdom, the town is saved. We don't know the actual story that he's referring to. It's not in Scripture exactly. It doesn't matter. It's not necessary to his point. What we're given are these great contrasts between the powerful and the small. The great king, a poor man. But wisdom was stronger than the great and powerful. Wisdom is better than strength. Wisdom is better than weapons of war. Isn't that wonderful? Wisdom must be highly valued, right? Nope. When it was over, no one remembered him. The poor man was not thanked. He was not appreciated. Why? Because he's poor.
They didn't even tell his story.
They didn't even tell a story. Yeah, great. So you can see that our critic is becoming a little bit cynical, eh? So let me ask, why do you think we value wisdom less if it comes from someone who's poor? Why might we value wisdom less if it comes from someone who's poor? Perhaps because we don't want to be poor. I think we listen to the voice of people that appear to have what we hope to be. So if you want to be rich, you listen to rich people. If you want to be a good leader, you listen to leaders. If you want to be a good parent, you ask questions to people who are good parents. If you want to be poor, we don't want to be poor. So maybe what attracts our attention isn't wisdom, but it's what we desire and our judgment of who it is that's offering advice. So wisdom itself doesn't really draw our attention unless we've gotten ourselves into a problem and wisdom's the way out of that problem. So we value wisdom to get us out of trouble, but then we're back to our own agenda again. You ever seen a TV commercial or a TV show that really promotes delayed gratification and saving money up before you make your big purchase and not doing the color trends, but actually thinking wisely about how you decorate? Yeah, of course not. Because that would be wise, and we're not attracted to that kind of wisdom. Doesn't sell anything. Oh, so true. Yeah, it doesn't sell anything. So our critic offers another thought on wisdom. Verse 17, better to hear the quiet words of a wise person than the shouts of a foolish king. Better to have wisdom than weapons of war, but one sinner can destroy much that is good. One person with a loud voice can stir up a crowd and take it in a different direction than a wise man or a wise woman would advise. How many movies have you seen where the king gives a war cry, fight and fight to your death for this cause? We will either die as free chickens or we will die trying. Chicken Run? Those are the only two options. So the writer, our critic, is noticing that when the fool speaks loud, we pay attention. We can even be swayed to his cause because he's loud. You ever notice that TV commercials are louder than regular TV programs? Yeah. Drove my dad crazy because he was blind. And he used to say, if someone could invent a device that would drop the volume of the TV when the commercial would start, they would sell millions. So the voice of wisdom can get overpowered by the loud. I wish it were not that way, but it is. I was asked to help a charity a month or so ago through a situation. So a group had asked 3 of us to meet with this charity. And the question required digging in sort of behind the scenes. And because we were digging in behind the scenes, it involved a fair amount of confidentiality. So we met and we reviewed things, and the board was very honest with us, and their logic made sense. So the 3 of us reported back to the group that sent us. And we explained nothing underhanded was going on, nothing malicious was going on. There was some bylaw issues that were a little inconsistent, but they had a plan, and their plan was good. But in this big meeting with these guys, a couple of the folks got loud. One in particular got very loud. They didn't understand what had happened. They didn't know the details, but they were convinced that what had happened was wrong. And the loudness and the relentlessness of the loudness just stirred up the room. And it was really hard to remain calm and listen, because I wanted to say something like, if I could tell you what I know, it would show that your view is wrong and what you're doing is not really helpful. Like, I just wanted to push back. But things are confidential, and they're confidential for a reason. My friend, as I was talking about this story with a friend, he said governments get caught in this, where politicians who are vying for power, who are trying to get in for power, talk about this is what should be done. And the politicians who know sometimes cannot say, this is why that idea won't work. There are some undisclosed pieces that will dramatically change the story. So, on the drive home from this big meeting, the 3 of us who had met with this charity were driving together. And I said, was there anything that I said that you would like to give me some feedback on? Because there had been one sentence I said that I thought, man, I'm not sure that was really helpful. And their feedback was, no, that one sentence you said was not helpful. Which is so funny, that very specific sentence. Because I wanted to stop the noise. And my friend said, in those situations, like someone who's older than me said, in those situations, I just try to offer what will soothe the crowd, because they're not listening to what we're saying. So can I soothe the noise? Yeah. So wisdom can be overpowered by the loud. I wish it were not true, but sometimes this is how it works. And then he gives us this third observation in chapter 10, verse 1. As dead flies are small, cause even a bottle of perfume to stink, so a little foolishness spoils great wisdom and honor. The idea is that a little bit of foolishness from one person has more weight, has more impact than great wisdom from another person. It can destroy what the wise person is trying to say. So, for example, there's a lot of air and space in this room, but if I was to put one drop of some stinky essential oil, you would all smell it. Like, that's the idea behind this phrase. The impact of one little bit of foolishness is so out of proportion. But foolishness is like that. It can just overpower a whole room. So wisdom can save. Wisdom is stronger than the great and powerful. But if it comes from a poor person, we might ignore it. The impact of the loud is much greater than the wise, and the impact of the foolish is way out of proportion. You can see why the writer's a tad critical or cynical. But by knowing this, we won't be frustrated when we see it happen. And I think it invites us to ponder, where do we actually find wisdom? What does wisdom look like? Because wisdom's probably not going to be in the loud. It's not going to be in what has great influence. It's probably not going to be in what our desires are seeking. So, do you have someone in your life, a relative or someone that you look up to and you say, I would call that a wise person? If you think about that person, how do they behave? They're probably not very loud. They probably don't demand to be heard. They probably listen to what's going on, sort of get a sense of the context and what are all the pieces. They probably know when somebody is not open to their advice or not open to listening to what they have to say. And I also think when they give advice, they're able to say why it is so. Like they can say, this is what it would be good to do. And they also explain, this is how the world works, this is how people work, and so this is why it's good to do. So I tend to listen for wisdom. Like I look for wisdom in what people say. I pay attention to what people say and what advice they give. And I find the wise, those who have experience, are able to just offer their perspective and let it float. Like they offer their advice and it floats in the room. And some people might grab it and ponder it, and other people might just let it float by. And the person who's wise just lets that happen. So I think that's a neat thing to learn. I don't think I'm there yet. I still want to push that you hear what I am saying. But then I offer the one sentence that doesn't help the room. So that was his riffing on the first story. The writer then gives us his second observation. In chapter 10, verse 5. There is another evil I have seen under the sun. Kings and rulers make a grave mistake when they give great authority to foolish people and low positions to people of proven worth. I have even seen servants riding horseback like princes and princes walking like servants. So in his context, princes are trained to lead a nation. Servants are not trained to lead a nation. They're trained for other tasks. So it's a mistake to take someone who is untrained for leadership and put them in leadership, and to take someone out of leadership who has proven their skill as a leader. And you might think, well, why does that really matter? And so the author gives a whole bunch of situations of why it matters. When you dig a well, you might fall in. What are you going to do about that? When you demolish an old wall, you could be bitten by a snake. What are you going to do about that? How are you going to avoid that? Like, things can go wrong in life. There is a randomness in life. So wisdom is helpful. Wisdom's good. You want your leaders to be wise. So while he's critiquing foolish leadership, I think he's also calling us to learn from foolish mistakes. Things like in 10, using a dull axe requires great strength, so sharpen the blade. It'll help you succeed. If a snake bites before you charm it, what's the use of being a snake charmer? Get good at being a snake charmer. Learn to be wise. The foolish, however, start with foolish assumptions. They chatter on and on. You know that person who chatters on and on because they know how they're going to make their life work, and they know how life works, and they know how they're going to be successful, and there's no end to all their plans? And he says, nobody knows the future. The foolish leaders spend time in parties and having fun rather than on the work of leading. So that little line, laziness leads to a sagging roof and idleness to a leaky house, he's saying, the kingdom is slowly falling apart on you. You're not putting in the work to learn how to be wise and lead well. But in his criticism of the foolish leader, I find the call to kind of humbly admit what I know and what I don't know, and to learn. Like, I think he's inviting us to admit what we just don't know, and then to engage in learning. Do you know the Peter Principle? Have you heard of the Peter Principle before? It's the idea that you can be promoted beyond your skill set and qualification. So if you're at a job and you're really good at your job, you would get promoted perhaps to the next level. And you do pretty good at that job and you get promoted to the next level. And there's a point where you'll get promoted beyond your training, beyond your knowledge, beyond your experience, and you will fail and you'll lose the job. Peter Principle. So in this passage, the ruler is putting people into the role of leading well beyond their skill set. And our critic is saying that's not a good idea. So I think for us, in our humility, to be able to say, I can do what I know, I can learn, and I need to learn what I don't know. I don't need to rush into the job that is actually beyond me. I can just learn and keep going. So we can become we are humble so that we can become wise. Which is an interesting line, right? To be humble in order to become wise. So I said I was helping this charity through a situation. One of the pieces that struck me at one of our last meetings was that this organization is led by regular, normal folks. It's not led by highly paid, highly trained executives. This charity is led by volunteers, people who have day jobs, who are doing the very best that they can. And what then impressed upon me was their willingness to learn, their willingness to listen to our advice, because some of us are more experienced in this kind of leadership. And they would ask, what do we do here kind of questions. They would even send out, like they're saying, we want to send out a letter. Can you review it to make sure it's saying what we think it's saying? It's really impressed that they understood their ability and they were wanting to learn. So let me review where we've been and we can talk about this passage. Our teacher, our critic, has made some observations about wisdom. It's better than strength. Wisdom is better than power, but it doesn't draw our attention, especially if it comes from someone we don't really aspire to be like. Being loud gets more attention than being wise. Wisdom can get hushed and overpowered. I wish it was not so. The impact of a little foolishness is way out of proportion. It can be greater than that of great wisdom. Wisdom is quiet. It offers its advice. It doesn't demand to be heard. But it does help you succeed because things happen, things go wrong, and you will want wisdom. So be humble so you can learn. Don't be the one promoted beyond your ability. Put in the work to become wise. So what's catching your attention in this passage? Kind of an interesting little story.
Much of this is just a description of what's going on now.
Yeah.
Yeah. The loud shout down the wise.
Yep.
You mentioned the Peter principle that somebody moves up until they get fired. That doesn't happen. They get moved up and then just make a mess of things.
Oh, yes. Well, that happens too.
They don't get fired. They get promoted.
Even worse.
As I said, it's the state of affairs. That's the way people think now. And
Yep.
that the way to push your ideas forward is to scream louder.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool.
I work in healthcare, and there's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of layers, and often loud people get listened to, and they may not have the best ideas, and so that, and then so much money goes into covering the mismanagement that then taxes go up, and there isn't enough for the poor. Over and over again, healthcare is a political issue. It is a political affair. And picking up on what Barry was talking about, yeah, the Peter principle, you get promoted to the level of your incompetence. But I think it's often the behavior that is more so struggled with those below. Because I think typically you can learn what you need to. And so there's a brilliant book written called What Got You Here Won't Get You There.
Yeah.
Say that again.
What got you here won't get you there. Goldsmith or Goldman. And he goes through and talks about like the 20 most common issues when you get promoted to a high level of leadership. And it's behavioral. And I've read it and it's like, oh yeah. So for example, one of them is favoritism. So you favor this one employee, well, that doesn't go well for the people you lead then. So that's just one example, and it's a brilliant book. He gets paid like 6 figures to go to high-level companies and work with the CEO, because typically the CEO, and it's like 99% is good. It's just that one issue. It's your anger, or you don't listen, or you always think that you have a better answer than everyone, even the frontline people. So brilliant book.
Yeah.
Humility. So you're talking about your experience working with this other charity, and it's like wise people can say what they think and just leave it there and let it float. I think that comes down to humility. So never pretend, never presume, never push. That's the never push part. And so it requires humility to become wise, but you don't become humble until after you're wise. So how does that work? But I still go back to that. And the one I have the most difficulty with is the never push. Never pretend, okay? Never presume, never push. And so I think it takes time to work on that, because you can't live life in such a way to guarantee an outcome and not push.
Yeah.
So you got to let go. And then my last thought was this idea in the passage of the poor wise person not being thanked and not being listened to, and how the church is to be different.
Yeah.
So the church is not the physical building, but for sake of an analogy, as soon as we walk into those doors, we are all on a level playing field. Like everyone who walks in is an equal. And how do we give people an equal say? How do we allow and create space for people to use their gifts? The church is to be different. You're not to be like those Gentile leaders who lord it over them. You're supposed to serve. And Jesus talks about this. So even this open mic, this is wonderful because anyone can come and engage with what you're learning. So don't feel, if you're here, that you have to come up and say it right. You can come up here and say something wrong or poorly, or that you disagree. And so the church is to be different. It's to be different. And so God help us all.
I like that. Jessica and I met with a pastor from the States this week. Jessica and I get into all kinds of weird trouble and all kinds of neat experiences. So a pastor came up to talk to us about New Life and find out what it's about. And I made a comment about how our service runs. And I said, I don't remember how I worded it, but something about, I know that I have a louder impact. Just because of my job and my training, I know that my presence is louder. And so therefore, I try to hold back. And so, I don't lead the whole service. We have service leaders who do this fantastic job, and I don't. And he's like, that's interesting because I guess in his context, you're the paid guy. You're supposed to be up all the time. And as soon as he said it, he paused and he went, and that's so not what Scripture teaches us. I was like, right, we're all equal. So if, for some people like myself, that I know I can have a louder presence, to purposely hold it back just to create an equal environment. So yeah, I really like that. It's good.
So it was funny because the thing that everything kind of brought to mind today, I guess because I work in an industry that works so closely with the poor, is actually hostile architecture. So it's architecture that is intentionally made to chase away the poor and homeless people.
Structural
Exactly. And so just sitting there thinking about how the whole idea of this has become, we're not going to actually pay attention to what the people who are experiencing these problems are saying about what are the problems and what are the structural solutions we're going to make the problem go away by making the poor people go away.
Yeah.
And it's just so frustrating because the people who are doing this are not stupid, they're foolish, which is very different.
Very different.
They know exactly what is happening. They know, they understand what is happening, but they're not thinking about all of the consequences of the choices that they're making. Because it doesn't make homelessness go away. It doesn't make poor people go away. It doesn't even make them go away in their cities. It just makes them go
Out of the plaza.
out of the touristy areas, out of the which solves zero things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Did you hear about that? I think it was in Alberta. A politician went down to one of the homeless camps because, he had all this advice of what needs to be, he or she, I don't even know. The politician went down to the homeless camps. They had heard all this advice, and they said, we just need to go talk with the people who are there.
Yeah.
And it was an entirely different story, and found things out, and then could come up with a plan to help people, not get rid of the homeless camp, but help the people. It was really interesting.
Yeah.
But that sense of, let's just go to where it is and start talking and listening. Yeah.
These people aren't stupid. They know what's going on.
Not stupid at all.
And they are wise in their context. We discount people who are poor because we think that if they're poor, they don't know what they're doing. People can just be poor. It doesn't mean they don't get it.
Good.
I really agree with what you said. I think we're really fortunate that here we try to do that. But it's been my experience that in most churches, they just follow the way of the world. The wealthy, the powerful, they're the ones who are listened to. They're the ones that are put into positions of authority. After I spoke and sat down, I thought, do you ever listen to question period from Parliament? What a ridiculous shouting each other down and refusing to listen.
It's like junior high.
Junior high is way better than that. You said that we'd listen to the rich because we want to be rich. I don't think that's
Well,
it.
I think we have a tendency to listen to what we aspire to. If it's rich, if it's leader, if it's whatever we aspire to.
Perhaps. I think that a lot of people listen to the rich because they worship them.
Aye.
They have deference for the rich. There are a lot of people that will openly say that the rich are better than I am. That therefore I should go with what they say.
I think there's a Disney movie that just came out about that. Right, Jess?
I was sharing with Adelaide on that way in that some of the history of Winnipeg and some of the fantastic things that people did, and not in a good way. The rich people just took advantage of everybody else.
Yep.
I have a tendency to listen to audiobooks while I do whatever I'm doing. And I've listened to two lately, which kind of seem like they circle around this subject in different ways. One is a Canadian author, Harold Johnson. He wrote a book called Peace and Good Order, I think. It's a short little book. He was an Aboriginal lawyer. He was a Crown attorney in Saskatchewan. He died quite young in 2022, but very thoughtful guy. And he saw like our legal system, of course, from the other side, if you want to say, from the prosecution side. And so he was able to say, like as an Aboriginal man, as a Crown attorney, he was able to pull these things together and say, hey, we are not doing a good job of this. And also that Canadians, the settler society, is still not doing a good job of listening well to the Aboriginal and the Indigenous wisdom about how to have a society that actually is wise and takes advantage of and encourages and incorporates the people that are in it, rather than shoving them all off to the side and punishing in ways that don't even really make sense. So that one. And then I listened this week to a book called Too Much and Never Enough by Donald Trump's niece, who is a psychologist. And it's quite the story of their family. And just the idea, it's an extreme example, but really I think this whole thing about wisdom being almost having to be an acquired taste, I find that terrifying in the sense that society as a whole, and some societies more than others, let this really run free. Some societies just do not value wisdom. They don't. They value other things more. And so they tend to get themselves as a group into some crazy situations. And I think the States tends that way more than us, but we follow them just like the younger siblings. So we are not doing a great job of this. And the idea that somebody could be loud and get up and say and do the things that Donald Trump did and get elected president, the night of the election, I still was absolutely sure there's no way that could happen. And I knew I wasn't alone. And so the fact that the loudest person doesn't even have to make sense and they still sway public opinion, because that's how humans are wired. I find that terrifying, because in quotation marks, democracy, in a democracy that's got an electoral system, we then have to live with the effects of that swaying of public, emotion, sentiment, opinion, because then people get elected who are not wise. And I think we're certainly facing situations like that over and over here as well. I find that challenging and terrifying. And also, it's an interesting concept, because you say, well, if that happens, when that happens, what do the Christians, or even people who are not Christians, what are the people who are committed to wisdom, what do they do? How do you respond to that? Because just giving up or going, sure, I'll just go with the flow, or there's a whole bunch of things there are options that aren't good either, and they don't help. And it doesn't even help you as a person. And so how do you handle it when the society around you, or the charity around you, or the neighborhood around you, or whatever is going really loudly in a non-wise direction? How do you handle yourself, and how do you participate? What do you do? It's a challenging and interesting thing, and it's part of our experience, I think. Even in one of the so-called best countries in the world, still it's definitely part of the deal.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Just find it interesting that wisdom seems to be almost, the natural human reaction to wisdom is almost like an allergic, it's not an attraction. It has a developed taste. You have to actually care about it and pay attention and develop it. And even then you still have to remind yourself.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
That's great. Let me offer a prayer, okay? Father, Lord, this is an interesting passage of Scripture. And I must say that when I first read it, I was not sure what was in it. And yet, through our discussion, wow, was there a lot in this. Father, help us to be a community, a church that pursues wisdom, that seeks wisdom, that loves wisdom, and a community that invites and embraces and is a group of equals. Yeah. Father, may we bring glory to you as we serve you, as we seek to obey and put into practice what you give us. For you are God, you are the sovereign, the supreme being, and you built the world, and you want us to be with you. And so we remember that first. Bring glory to yourself. We love you. Amen.
Thank you for listening to our podcast today. New Life Ministries is located in Winnipeg, Manitoba. You are invited to join our service in person or over Zoom. Please use the Contact Us link to send an email to the church office and request the address or Zoom link. If you would like to use these podcasts as part of your home church or local church gathering, you are free to do so. We do request that you let us know. If there is any other way that we can help you in your ministry, please send us an email.